Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Cox, and I don't know about you guys, but whenever I get to this time of the school year, so it's at the end of May, the beginning of June, that crunch is on, especially in high school, because we know exams are in 15 days, so we need to fit in some exam review. And all of those great ideas that I may have had regarding teaching units seem to go out the window, especially when I realize that I might have a unit left to teach. And we all talk about how there's things that are really important for students to learn in order for them to be set up for next year. And I find that this is particularly the case in science. And every year when I sit down to teach grade 10 science and I do all of my planning, I always think about how awesome this year is going to be, because I am not only going to hit all of those great ideas in biology and chemistry and that optics unit, but I'm also going to introduce the kids to some really awesome climate change things. And yet, June rolls around and I may only have 4 or 5 days left to teach climate change. So I thought that maybe through this little mini web series that I've created, we can come together as teachers all across Ontario and Canada and the world and maybe discuss some ideas and collaborate together to create some really enriched climate change tasks. And I thought that maybe I would share some of my successes and even some of my failures with you. And as a new teacher, I'm really looking forward to this. And so I want to introduce teaching climate change, and this is really geared towards grade 10 science, but it can be used cross-curricularly. So we know that climate change comes up in the Ontario curriculum, in geography as in grade 9, as well as some social issues in the grade 10 civics and careers course, and as well it comes back in hospitality and tourism and other geography classes in 11 and 12 in environmental science. And so I thought, why not start with grade 10 science, specifically because that grade 10 science has a whole strand in the Ontario curriculum that discusses the need for teaching climate change. And the first way that we design lessons in teaching, a good pedagogical approach, is to design enriched tasks for introducing climate change in the classroom. And so I thought that maybe I would talk about some of the things that have really worked for me. So this year, instead of leaving climate change to the end of the course and seeing if I had enough time, and instead of doing the opposite where I put climate change at the beginning of the course and then run out of time for things that I also think are important in setting students up for grade 11 science, which would be maybe sacrificing some of that biology or chemistry knowledge that they need to have. One of the things that I did that actually worked really, really well was I set aside every Friday of each week as Climate Change Fridays. And this did a couple of things. So the first thing is that students who were having a rough time with any of the units, and we know that this is the first year that students are really seeing chemistry and are really seeing biology, and let's not even go to those optics and physics diagrams that they have to draw and that math that they have to do. Those can be really challenging, and so the first thing that this did was it gave students a little bit of a break. And so instead of bombarding students with theoretical knowledge, which I feel sometimes happens in the other three strands, now students are being asked to invoke critical thinking measures. And so that's the first thing that I did. So students had a little bit of a break. The second thing that happened was that I was able to incorporate some inquiry-based models for climate change that I think we don't always see in the other units in grade 10 science. And one of those things is almost resembles a Genius Hour project that we would see in the elementary curriculum, where students come in, they pick any topic, they can explore it. Whereas I kind of took that idea and I altered it for my grade 10 science class. And we're going to see how that played out. So hopefully you find this interesting. So let's talk about some of the activities. So we try to come up with these enriching tasks with the goal that if we can stem the critical thinking and we can get students engaged in a topic, then maybe they'll become that lifelong learner that we're always trying to achieve here. But one of the first things that I do, and I'm not sure if you guys do this, but one of the first things I do when I introduce a topic is to assess prior knowledge. And with climate change, that seemed to be really, really interesting. So I had some students who had discussed regularly climate change in elementary school, and I had some students who hadn't really talked about it. I had some students who told me that it's a regular discussion at their homes, and I had some students who, when they brought home a climate change survey to their parents, they said that their parents don't really think about it. And so I thought that this was really interesting. In my high school, we have a 1-to-1 Chromebook ratio. So every student in my class has their own Chromebook, and they're throughout the school year. So from September to June, they have access to these Chromebooks all the time. They're allowed to bring them home with them. And so one of the things that we are trying to do is be paperless. And so we kind of talk about that a little bit in this climate change unit. But really what that allows me to do is a lot of Google Forms. And what's great about Google Forms is that they're anonymous. And so at the end of this web series, I'm going to share all of these resources that we talk about. And hopefully, if you feel comfortable sharing resources, I'm going to pool them all together, and maybe we can start a team drive or do something like that, so that all of these science teachers kind of all over the world have access to this collaboration. And I'll throw in the Google Forms that I use. So the Google Forms are a great way of students expressing what they know. You, as the teacher, can decide whether or not you want to attach identity factors to them, so a student's name or an email, or if you want it to be anonymous. And what will happen is that the Google Form will actually computate all of the data. So you get to see in pretty graphs what everybody knows. What I actually did this year, though, there's this phenomenon going on in my classroom where my students love using these individual whiteboards, and I have them for science, but I really use them when I teach math. So I thought I would bust them out. And with the whiteboards, all I asked my grade 10s to do was to write about anything that they knew about climate change. And it wasn't necessarily opinion-based, but anything that they had ever heard discussed, or what they think what climate change is, or what causes climate change, anything that they discussed about climate change. And I got a range of things, as you will see from this picture. And so one of my students knew nothing about climate change. In fact, they just held up their board and they said, "Miss, all I know is how to spell climate change." And I thought that was awesome. We have some boards that are really filled in, and we have some boards that have lots of good ideas, but they may not always be right. And so this kind of leads into the next activity. I want to preface this with all of these activities are great, and it's awesome to use an inquiry-based approach where students are maybe unpacking all of these issues on their own and they're doing their own research. But I think as teachers, we need to be ready to guide them. And one of the things that we need to guide them with is that we know that climate change is a scientifically proven fact. Not only is it a scientifically proven fact and that it's happening, but that most scientists agree that human activities are accelerating climate change. And so we see in the past these mass events of climate change that have nothing to do with humans, but it's being accelerated as humans are kind of going about their daily lives right now. And I think that that's important to discuss. We're going to talk later on about great ways to incorporate opinion-based exercises, but climate change should never be left to an opinion-based paper. So what I mean by this is that students should not be exploring whether or not climate change exists, because scientists have proven that climate change exists. It would be like asking students whether or not the lungs exist in a body. Okay, their opinion on that. We know through scientific fact that these exist. So, as I was saying, some of the information is wrong on this slides, on these whiteboards. And this kind of introduced the next activity. So students were writing ideas on their whiteboards, and I thought, okay, well, how can I not only encourage them to find their own resources, but we'd been talking, and it's scaffolded throughout the year. So in the first week, we come up with these questions and these ideas, and I give students some resources. In the second week, students are coming up with their own questions, and they're using some more of my resources. And then it kind of stems from there and is scaffolded as the class unfolds, because in the first couple of weeks, I'm still getting my feel for my students. And I'm sure you guys have a similar situation maybe. So as the class unfolds and as I get to know students' skill settings and we unpack other research skills in the classroom, what I love to do is have this peer review process. So I bring in this peer review. And so students are given these whiteboards. They're also given big pads of Post-it notes that go on the walls, and we have some vertical learning surfaces in our classroom as well. And a student will come in, so normally I split the students up so that each student, there's groups of them. So every week a new group of students is bringing in a question related to climate change. And so on the vertical surfaces, they will write that question, and students come up with some research. So it's kind of like Genius Hour, but it's a little bit more directed and it's specifically focused on climate change. And so students are trying to answer the questions. And as they put information up on the board, other students might be fact checking, or they could come around and with a different colored whiteboard marker, they're just writing in their ideas, or maybe saying you need to check on this, or how can we correct this, or how about we look at this source together. And then at the end of the class, we have students come up and they actually explain what's going on, whether or not their questions were answered. And if there needs to be more guiding from my point of view, then I can do that. The great thing about the vertical learning surfaces is that I am by no means a climate change expert. My degree is in biochemistry and math, so I'm very, very much not an expert in climate change. But with the vertical learning surfaces, as I'm seeing the questions go up in the board and I'm circulating, I also have an opportunity to co-research with some students. And so the first week, this may not unfold like this. In the first week, I might give the questions and I might actually show students how to do more sound research. I don't think that there's ever foolproof research on Google, but more sound research and maybe some search engines that we can use that might be more reliable and how to look for accurate information. So this is one of those things where back in the day I used to make a fake Wikipedia page and I would go in and edit it to say some really ridiculous things that students would know would be false. And so then we would talk about how maybe we wouldn't use Wikipedia versus something else. So that's my first idea. The second idea is to really encourage this question and answering notion so that students with questions, and it falls very hand in hand with the peer review process. We know that students are more likely to be engaged in the topic if they have an active say in it, if they can kind of drive their own learning here. And research shows us this, but I think that it's really hard for us to put this into practice. And I find that I always struggle with this, especially as a young new teacher, with all of the other things that I'm trying to do and put on and I have on my plate. I'm actively trying to find new ways to make research and to make students critical thinkers. And I'm not sure if you guys struggle with this as well. So one of the things that I've started doing is this question and answering style of lesson. So on Climate Change Fridays, I don't prepare a single slide. I don't prepare a lesson. I don't prepare notes where I would, go through and lead them through maybe the anatomy of a body like I would in the systems unit of biology. Instead, students are coming in with their questions and actively together, we are researching the solutions. And so, as I said, this might be way more scaffolded in the beginning of the semester where I might actively be hand-holding. I might Google Cast onto my smartboard and be guiding students through that research finding process and that scientific method and inquiry process. But by the end of the semester, it actually kind of takes off and students are able to form these critical thinking skills that they don't just use on Climate Change Fridays. They actually use them throughout the whole week after this. And so this is one of the ideas that I've started to do. But I think that there's a ton more ideas, and I would love to hear from you guys. So one of the things that I'm struggling with is getting more active climate change resources that encourage outside time. I work in Bracebridge, and we have this wonderful school. You'll see it next video, where we are actually sometimes in the winter, students go out and tap the trees, and there's all of this great scenery. And I want to incorporate that. So I'm wondering what your ideas are. And so there's a little board here if you want to copy this link. It's also in the bio, and you just go onto the Lino, and it's basically a post-it board. So you take your post-it, you write your idea, and you put it up there, and it's going to be active for a while. So I'll get notifications every time something's added into it. And at the end of the series, what I'm hoping is that I can screenshot all of these ideas and put them in as a nice little resource for you guys. I really appreciate your help with this. And I hope that we can have some great conversation. Hit me up if you have any more questions. Please feel free to subscribe to my page. Thank you.